Is sustainability work session, and we have Shannon here to lead us through it.
I don't think the training was nice one. Okay, well, while she's
Maybe just
doing
introduce
that-
yourself, just real quick, just in case they.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So, my name is Shannon Hessler. I started as a planner up here 2 months ago. What?
July 10th.
July 10th, yeah, so,
Just like 10.
like, what day is it? Yeah, so 2
months.
months, almost exactly. And I come from a sustainability climate action planning background, and so I'm really excited to begin this conversation tonight. Before we begin, this is gonna be a really high level. I don't wanna get into any nitty gritty policy conversations yet, those will come, but today is just very high level, like what is our overarching mission, vision, values around sustainability and climate action. So, with that in mind. Again, tonight, the goals are, this is a super informational session and less of a conversational session, that will come in at our next work session, but the goal of tonight is mainly that we have a mutual understanding of sustainability and climate action plans and processes and like what is happening regionally. And then we can start to have a conversation about our overarching vision and have an agreement on the next step. So our next meeting. At our future work sessions, then we can start getting in agreement about our specific areas of priority and specific policy work. So, with that in mind, here's an agenda for the next hour. We're gonna do a really quick review of sustainability and climate action planning, talk about some of the regional and state goals, and then kind of walk through some of our previously identified priorities. So, what is our vision concerning sustainability and climate action? And then I'll talk through the steps that I'm recommending to write and create a climate action plan, and that includes a greenhouse gas emissions inventory and a lot of community involvement. And then we'll end with the timeline and what the next steps look like. And if this gets like a little jargony, like it's a GHG greenhouse gas emissions inventory, please stop me and I can talk through it. But there is a lot of jargon associated, so. Right off the bat, I want to make a distinction between sustainability planning, climate action planning. And so sustainability planning, specifically planning around the 3 pillars of sustainability, which is environmental health, economic health, and social equity. So anything that's sustainable is right in the middle. And a really good example of that is affordable housing. So affordable housing fits really well into sustainability planning. And then when we're creating a sustainability plan, we want to have a lot of different metrics to measure impact. So that could be water, that could be affordable housing, it could be cost of heating. Like there's a lot of different metrics in a specifically sustainability plan. And the difference is that a sustainability plan can include a climate action plan, but a climate action plan is not a sustainability plan. Super jargon. But a climate action plan specifically is targeting greenhouse gas emissions. So those are the gases that are causing climate change, directly contributing to climate change. And so when we're talking about a climate action plan, all of our metrics are specifically measured in just emissions. So sustainability plan, we're talking about the economy, we're talking about health, well-being, environmental stewardship. Climate action planning, we're just talking about things that produce emissions and how we measure them and how we reduce them. So that's like vehicles and electricity and methane gas, propane, all that stuff. And so climate action plan can include adaptations to climate change. So thinking about wildfire here is a big one that I would think that we would want to include. But that's kind of the difference. So sustainability plan is much more holistic, it's much more overarching, and then climate action plans are dialed down specifically to emissions. Questions about that? Cool. Okay, so what do I mean by greenhouse gas emissions inventory? So when we talk about climate change, we know there's a bunch of different greenhouse gases that are contributing, so carbon dioxide is the main one, and we have methane from cow farts and whatever else you've heard. All of those emissions get lumped into greenhouse gases. And so when we do an emissions inventory, we're taking every single thing that exists that within the boundary of the community that produces emissions, and we're measuring it. So on a really big scale, that could include agriculture, mining, electrical power, industrial processes, water, wastewater, land use, fuel use, energy generation, waste management, everything that we do produces emissions. And so on a really large scale, an emissions inventory is measuring all the greenhouse gases from each of those sectors. But on a smaller scale, like in a jurisdiction such as Mount CB, it's mostly going to be us looking at commercial and residential buildings, so energy, and then fuel being burned in buildings, so propane, natural gas, fuel oil, transportation, solid waste, and then water wastewater treatment. So I know this is really hard to read, but this is the one for Mountain Village, which I think will be a very similar outcome to our emission inventory. And so basically the dark blue and the dark gray are coming from buildings. So that means most emissions are coming from electricity and then natural gas, propane. There's a tiny bit coming from solid waste and a tiny bit coming from transportation, but mostly it's coming from buildings. And I think once we do our emissions inventory, that will probably be really similar to Mount Castile. Pitkin County has this really cool dashboard that I can share with you guys that has oh man, this is hard to read. But basically it shows for all Pitkin County, all of their emissions. And so if we look at Snowmouse Village, which is probably again really similar to Mount Castile. Okay, well, this is linked if you want to look at it later, but basically,
Can I ask you a quick question?
yeah,
When I click on the Snowmass Village or Aspen,
Yeah.
it's still a static on that home page, you just click the button.
there's like a little bar across the bottom.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So, yeah, there's like a tab on the bottom that goes to it. But so this dashboard, if you want to click through it later, since it's not showing up very well on the screen, just kind of shows the comparison between by sector, so energy, transportation, waste, and then compares all of the different communities. There we go. So what's interesting to think about in this dashboard is that, and it kind of gets at why we would even want to do an emissions inventory in the first place, is you look at Aspen, Snowmass Village, and unincorporated Pitkin in the blue is building energy. And so you can see that, maybe you can't, but for Aspen, Snowmass Village, and unincorporated Pitkin, most of the emissions are coming from building energy. Whereas Basalt, it's almost equal transportation and building energy. And so Aspen's town of Aspen versus Basalt are gonna want to have different strategies because more emissions are coming from energy and buildings in Aspen than in Basalt. And so Basalt might have more transportation focused kind of action plan. So the reason that we go through this whole process to get an emissions inventory is so that we understand very specifically where our emissions are coming from and where we have the most leverage to target to reduce those emissions. Make sense? So for some global context, when we're talking about climate change and climate action planning, the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, recommends that emissions peak by 2025, and then we hit at least a 50% reduction by 2030. The reason that's important is because almost all climate action plans are based off of at least that target. So when you zoom into the state of Colorado, the greenhouse gas pollution reduction roadmap requires 50% by 2030. So that's kind of a goal that we should be shooting for. It's recommended by globally for developed countries to hit at least 50%. It's recommended by the state. And it's recommended by Gunnison County, CD, and the city of Gunnison. So just as some, just as a little bit of a distinction between some regional plans that already exist. There's the Gunnison Valley Climate Action Report, which was published in 2020. And that report is basically a synopsis of the emissions in Gunnison County, for the whole county, as well as a pathway towards that emission reduction. It doesn't have anything like very specific. It has policy recommendations, but it doesn't have any policy requirements. So it allows the jurisdictions that opt into that plan to kind of figure out their own pathway to that emission reduction. Because Gunnison should probably have a much different strategy than us, because our energy consumption is different, our vehicles are different, like our emissions are different than Gunnison. So we want to have different strategies. But the Gunnison County thing doesn't provide those strategies, it just provides different options and different pathways. CD has a climate action report or a climate action plan that they published in 2018 that has an emission reduction goal. And then the city of Gunnison has more of a sustainability plan, which is what I would recommend that we pursue. So their plan is climate action, resiliency, and environmental sustainability. Gunny is called Gunny Cares, and this is my master's project, so I think it's really cool. But it's basically a roadmap to 2030, and it talks about emissions reductions. It talks about emission reductions, and it has, instead of 50%, it has a 30,000 metric tons of CO2e. That's a lot of jargon, but basically 50% reduction again. And then there's a long section about providing resiliency and independence for residents. So thinking about how Gunnison has basically one road in, one road out. How do we provide resiliency in faces of in a natural disaster? How do we provide power? How do we provide food supply, water? So that's all of that plan, as well as renewable energy, thinking about their domestic water supply, and then increasing diversion rates. So decreasing the amount of waste going to the landfill, and increasing the amount of stuff that's getting composted, recycled, and reused. So that's some examples of plans that exist regionally. And my recommendation again would be to go towards a more like Gunnison plan, but that is something that we can discuss.
That's a quick question.
Yeah.
And is that just because there's more directives and measurable things rather than like, we want to do this thing?
Yeah, so a climate action plan, like Crested Buttes climate action plan is maybe 7 pages long. And it says, you want to hit this emissions reductions target by this year, actually, so it will be interesting to see if they hit it. But it's like 7 pages. It's like, okay, here's 5 things in transportation that we're going to do, and they're going to reduce our emissions by 10%. Here's 5 things in energy, building/energy we're going to do. We're going to reduce our emissions by 10%. I can't even remember. They have buildings, transportation, waste. But it's very, very short, and it's just focused at emissions. Versus Gunny Cares. I'm not recommending that we do specifically this. It's like 100-something pages long, and it has climate action strategies and water conservation and resiliency. Like one of the items in there is having workshops to prepare go bags, so everybody in Gunnison is ready in case they have to evacuate. We're having workshops to improve resiliency. So it's really, really overarching. But kind of the conversation that we can have is that in the master plan, there is a lot of sustainability stuff already woven in. So if we want to just pull out specifically climate action and go in that direction, that's an option. Or we can do this whole other much larger project focusing on a lot of different areas. So that's something that we can discuss.
Yeah, you mean the emissions part of everything would be a small part of it with the sustainability? Yeah, because I think they're not included at all.
Oh, definitely. We so in the master plan, there is a specific policy item that is engaged in collaborative climate action planning. So pretty much no matter what, I'm recommending that we do an emissions inventory. So, yes, it's just kind of like what we want to do with that data. So, yeah.
So you at least. The gummy one, kind of carried me, obviously read, but the others you looked at it. And then, besides just the. I'm just gonna say the arbitrary 50% emissions.
Yes,
you know,
totally.
and it's a number, right? It's a number. Do they include costs to these?
Some of
Because
them-
I wouldn't like anything we do.
Yeah.
That we set a goal to include costs.
yes. So, Gunnison does not.
Cause I would hate for us to have this great flowery plan.
Right.
And a bankruptcy account.
Yeah, so, and you kind of jumped ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's perfect.
I think I kind of skimmed it and I was like, maybe we put them out, but yeah.
So,
I just like to make sure
it's-
it costs.
yeah. So my strategy for doing something like this, no matter if we're looking at everything from environmental stewardship and trails to housing to climate action, or if we're just zoomed in on climate action. The emissions part should inform the strategies, but it shouldn't be the only factor, right? Like, we want to think about.
It's a
If we have,
three-legged stool.
yeah, we have three strategies. One reduces our emissions by 10%, 40%, and 90%. But the 90% one is prohibitively expensive. The middle one also has some like added benefits. It's better for our health and human safety, or it adds jobs or something like that. Like, I want to weigh all of those values. So it's not just like, what is the most emissions reductions? It's what can we do that biggest bang to our buck emissions wise, and also promotes equity, fosters sustainability, environmental sustainability. It has a lot of cool benefits. That answer your question?
Yeah.
So like an example of that is, how do we reduce? We know most likely our emissions are mostly going to be from buildings up here. The easiest thing would be just, okay, we're going to spend whatever millions of dollars to produce all of our own renewable energy, not to solve that problem. It will basically be carbon neutral. That's not really accessible, and it's not really helping our community. So that one, like, it is a strategy, but it's not the one that we pursue, that we should pursue. That makes sense. Cool. So, yeah, so CB's plan. So this is their climate action plan from 2017, and this is one of the things that they just did this year, which is the above building code standards. So they projected how much CO2 they're gonna reduce. They estimated that it's $2 times out of 4, I think. There is like an appendix that actually details that, but like this one, building energy use, mandate building automation. Is less CO2 reduced and less. So that's how a lot of these climate action things showcase how much money it's gonna cost, but that's definitely something that we need to be considering all the time. Other questions? So I pulled out this one specific policy action item from the master plan. But also in the master plan, in the very beginning, it says that we approach sustainability holistically, like outline goals, policies, and recommendations related to land use, housing, community services, transportation, and water. So we know that those are already identified values within our community for our sustainability plan. So if we're gonna go for a big sustainability plan, I would suggest that we pull out these ones that we've already identified. And then in 2021, early on, there was a climate action strategy meeting. I think a lot of you were at it. Michael Yerman facilitated, and that was the other attachment to this packet, was the synopsis of that. But in one sentence, basically that climate action strategy was that Mount CB will take deliberate and immediate action through multiple policies projects and promote community-wide environmental stewardship to address the climate emergency that threatens the town's resort economy. So these are our established visions, missions around sustainability and climate action. We're going to take deliberate and immediate action to address climate change. So to me, that reads as we are going to do an emissions inventory and we are going to write a climate action plan and then act on it, as well as including sustainability within our master plan or within a much larger sustainability plan.
That's the question.
Yeah.
Just as a regular citizen that sees this,
Mhm.
the perception is, great, they've made the statement and they're gonna do a study and they're gonna make a plan and then they're gonna do something. Are there things that we can and should be doing while that's happening to actually point to something that's been accomplished?
Yeah, absolutely. So. Just because we're starting this climate action planning process doesn't mean that we're ignoring all the stuff that was already worked on in the master plan. So an example of that is updating to the new energy codes, which we're in the process of doing right now. We're not gonna like pause everything that we've talked about in order to make a plan that might sit somewhere. Like part of this needs to be continuously acting on already established goals. And I don't see it on the one or the other scenario. But this is a more specific, or the selling point for creating a sustainability plan is that it's a much more community involved, focused just on sustainability, and also where it'll be much more specific than the master plan, like engage in collaborative climate action is not very specific. But creating a climate action plan that has very specific action items that are measurable. I think is the argument for,
Well, I'll try to point out one thing that staff's been working on, is the update to the landscape code. And so that's been an effort trying to, sustainability to adopt standards that reduce water consumption. So we've been working on that and hopefully we'll, this fall, in the winter.
Hopefully you keep those at the top of the list, so we can revisit them because stuff with our strategic plan, we wouldn't it was a couple of years ago, we didn't update them, so when we were looking at it, it was like, oh, those things did happen, let's not take them off, but cross them out or something, so it's like your to-do list, if you keep writing your to-do list, you never have anything fully done.
Yeah. And this is like
Just
kind
to
of,
celebrate all the work that staff's doing,
this is like kind of diving really deep into it, but I would love to have, instead of just like 100-page plan, we have some kind of dashboard that we can update quarterly or yearly on where we're at. Instead of just a really long plan, because I think a lot of sustainability plans sit without much action, so something that's like updatable frequently would be my vision. And also it's more interactive with the public. That's down the line. Other question. Cool. Okay, so, and then I'm gonna stop talking for a minute. The areas of priority that I pulled out from these different plans, from the strategic plan, the climate action strategic plan for 2021. The main areas were renewable energy, built environment, so our buildings, transportation, landfill diversion, and stewardship. In the master plan, we have land use, housing, parks and rec, transportation, community service, climate action, water. The ones that are highlighted in red are in bold. So those are our super high priorities, so built environment, housing, transportation. And then some other areas of priority that we can start thinking about are resilience and hazard mitigation and adapting to climate change, equity and justice, so that kind of plays back into housing. Food is included in like in Madison climate action plan, we talked quite a bit about food. And then products and consumption. And there's a lot of other things that we can start thinking about, and I don't want to get like a hard and fast list written here tonight, but these are the areas that I'm starting to think about. And so I'd like to hear the feedback from you guys after that intro on if these areas seem to fit, if there's other areas that are glaringly missing. If we're feeling strongly towards sustainability plan, climate action plan. Or any other questions?
Yeah, so. Got housing
Yeah.
in red. And then when you got the other, you said equity and justice and you used housing as an example, so give me a different example for equity and justice and just like housing.
I'll just keep it up. So there's a lot, and it's. We're in a really interesting place here to think about this, but that could be equitable access to transportation and bikes, like I think the e-bike rebate program is kind of an example of equity. So we're bringing down the cost for someone to have a more sustainable source of transportation. But when I think of equity and climate action plan, what I specifically think about is in Gunnison County, the heat, the energy cost burden is, which is how much you're paying for energy compared to your income. So for the lowest AMIs, it's super high. It's like extremely exacerbated, higher than the state average in Gunnison County. Because we have pretty bad housing stock for our lowest income levels. Energy is not that cheap here, and it's cold. So we're running heat like 10 months of the year, 10 months of winter. So something like GB Heat, which addresses existing housing stock and tries to lower that energy cost burden, is to me, a really good example of equity and climate action. Because if you put more insulation in an old house that they're having, it's gonna lower their cost of heating. But it also is gonna lower the amount of energy they're using. Energy is directly correlated to emissions. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about equity. And it's one of those things that we should be weighing, like, if we were to opt in, GCEA doesn't exactly have this option, but if it was an option to opt into 100% renewable, but it's gonna raise the cost of electricity for all residents by 100%. Is that right if we're just talking about emissions? Yes, but is it right if we're looking at an equitable solution? No. So kind of equity specifically, but also looking at all of our solutions through an equitable lens.
And the justice portion.
Yeah. I feel like making sure that it's not just, when I was telling you this morning, I call it kind of like the Boulder effect. So Boulder is this amazing place that's got all this visible renewable energy and it's very clean, and who's benefiting from renewable energy and really good air quality and stuff is the people at the top of our AMI spectrum. And so what we want to avoid is having like a greenwashing that happens for rich people and is not shared across the spectrum. That's kind of what I mean by this. So equal access to sustainable solutions that are good for the environment, but also good for human health.
Across all socioeconomic.
Yeah,
Socioeconomic.
and it's pretty weird in Mount CV, like, is that?
Yeah, I'm just weighing that with the presentation we had a couple councils ago where guy's name came and
Right, that's fair.
yeah, Frank came talked about education.
Mhm.
I mean, he gave his points, but it was large cost. The underlying thing is electricity is more expensive than natural gas or propane. And so when you're talking about the difference in costs.
Yeah.
And to use your term equity, because.
Yeah.
The cost that those services are expensive for the lower AMI, you're taking an option away with the electricity.
Exactly, so,
So you have to weigh out.
Yep.
Are you inadvertently punishing people by making them go electric?
Yeah.
And making it even more less affordable.
Yeah. and I don't wanna like dive too deeply,
No,
because we can
no,
talk
yeah.
about electrification for 10 years, but yes, the way that I would approach a climate action plan or a sustainability plan is that there's a lot of ways, like, we don't need to be that creative. There's a lot of ways, to reduce emissions. Basically, renewable energy, so green the grid, reduce the amount of energy that you're using and get everything electric. At the same time, that's basically it, that's the action. But not all of those strategies make sense economically for us here. They don't make sense geographically for us here, and they're not gonna make sense. Not gonna be the most equitable. So we wanna weigh everything against our solutions.
Frank also did mention the volatility of natural gas and electricity is more stable, so if natural gas might be lower now, but twice as much next winter. As we look at these different topics, should we in the back of our mind be thinking budgetary, like each? And I'm not trying to needle down, but.
Yeah.
Let's say the GBE program, like, okay, well, how much can we affect with an X amount of donation to that or contribution to that per year? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think also when you start talking about electrification and the built environment. And what's the return on your investment for either grants or matching grants or investment to budget? And part of that is with solar. Because, that's almost immediate. Your investment is providing electricity that you otherwise wouldn't be burning through coal and natural gas fired plants. So I think the town should really take a look at it.
So, is there anything on this list that is glaringly missing from this list, or anything that's like red flag? Or could maybe be lower priority?
I think it's a really difficult one because we're largely dependent on other folks. But there is a recycling gap, and I don't think Sustainable Crested Butte has been operating. I recently was trying to find a place to dispose of some oil. I changed the oil in my snow blower and had some oil to get rid of, and I've not found that yet in Gunnison County. There's some things that say they do and all that, but I've not encountered that yet. And so I know for household recycling, like we have to deal with waste management for the foreseeable future. But I just wonder if there's anything the town could do to supplement recycling efforts.
So more of an emphasis on.
Or I believe me, I've tried, or maybe even something like that, a recycling day where other towns have done that. I know the county does that once in a while, but man, I think it's like once a year. And if you miss that day, then you're stuck with whatever you're trying to get rid of. So maybe town could facilitate that once a year of the hard to recycle item day kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, just the amount of items that we brought in 6 points on the other town cleanup day.
Yeah,
That was amazing. How much
it was
amazing use.
I got a house plant out of that deal. It's sitting next to the dumpster and now it's in a place in Providence in my house.
The plastic one or we want?
Well, it's a real one.
Sweet, well, let's keep rolling and stuff mine. But this is kind of, and I am happy to get really nitty gritty with anybody at any time about this stuff. If you think of something later. So. That whole ecosystem of things that I just talked about, what's happening regionally, what the IPCC is telling all of us we need to do. What we've already identified as areas of priority, what I kind of pulled out was our overarching vision. And this is almost word for word from the climate action strategy. Deliver an immediate action to address the climate emergency that threatens the town's resort economy and reduce emissions by at least 50%. That's not a goal I made up, that's the pretty standard for most climate action plan. And where that gets tricky is that our baseline is gonna be different than the state's baseline. So our baseline will probably be 2019, so we might have to do some. We can make that target more specific. once we have a baseline of what our emissions actually are. And then the second bullet point for sustainability would be that we have a holistic approach to sustainability, which will increase environmental health, economic prosperity, and social equity. So, all of those ideas aside, how do we get here? And kind of what I'm proposing is these steps, immediately. So we're gonna continue working on the sustainability strategies that are identified in the strategic plan and the master plan. And then, these other action items are things that I don't think we're gonna go into right now, but there's something that I would like to put on the table, so. I made this font really big because I these T's are small, but. Consider joining Mountain House 2030. They have a net zero pact that most mountain communities surrounding us, including CB, are on. I have a slide on that later, so you can dig into it a little bit. Consider joining Colorado Communities for Climate Action, CC4CA, which is a group that fights for legislation at the state level it makes climate action easier. Renew partnership with, and this is like the worst acronym ever, it's ICLEI, but it stands for Local Governments for Sustainability. It is not an American nonprofit. But renewing our membership with them is how it's a nonprofit that provides kind of like consulting for climate action plans, but they also have software that does the emissions calculations. So basically what I will do in phase 1 is reach out to GCA, reach out to RTA, which they already have their emissions really well documented, and reach out to Waste Management and try to approximate tons of waste or kilowatt hours of energy used in Mount Crested Butte for the inventory year. And then this software helps do the math that turns kilowatt hours of electricity used into emissions of CO2. So that software, the membership is like $1,000 or something. So that's pretty much the only budget item I have so far. And we were already memberships with ICLEI. We already had a membership with ICLEI, so we're just renewing that for this year. And then consider adopting resolution 15, which was in 2021, 2020, no, I don't remember, 2021,
2020,
I think the last time we
late
looked at it
2021,
was,
early 20. No,
I think the last time we looked at it, that was the council was like first of this year.
yeah, it was, Greg was
Greg was
here,
still here.
it was like December, January, so
Something like that.
2022, 2023.
Okay, so, I read through the notes about why that kind of got tabled, and a lot of the questions around it were, why would we adopt Gunnison's framework? Shouldn't we be more specific? And the answer is yes, both, like Gunnison Valley's GHG greenhouse gas mitigation plan, mitigation meaning reducing emissions. Specifically has a target, and then it has a lot of different recommendations, but it's not policies that we have to adhere to. So signing on to that just means that we are down to hit that 50% target, and it's non-binding. So if we don't meet it, it's not like anything happens, but I would recommend that we jump on that because we're the last jurisdiction in the county not to adopt it.
Somebody else can refresh my memory if this is wrong, but I don't think we jumped on that Mountain Towns 2030. And it might be worth revisiting for why and how we can discuss that, because I think there was talk of cherry picking some things out of it that we
Yeah.
didn't want to do and
So
not read it.
this is the Mountain Towns 2030 net zero. And I'm guessing this was, the first one was the red flag, so it's addressing climate, this is a bunch of communities signed on, including Crested Butte, pretty much everyone from the county, Park City, signed on to this pact that has these 3 action items. So addressing climate change at the speed and scale of demand by committing to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2030. What I've been recommending is 50% reduction. This is net zero, which is like a bit more significant. But again, this is a non-binding, so it could be something that we strive for. And then the second one is implementing an inclusive and resilient long-term climate action plan that included diverse voices. So kind of the equity aspect, not just us, telling our community, this is what we need to do for climate action. And then scalable solutions that grow local economies, protect public health, and create a sustainable carbon future for all. I'm not just thinking about emissions, but thinking about all the other positive impacts that come with reducing our emissions. So Mountain Towns 2030 is also has a conference every year in October. I will be going to it, so I can chat more about that as well. Thoughts. I know it's hard to read. But I would guess that this was the red flag, is the net zero. So that is also something that we could cherry pick through. So quickly, the strategy that I'm gonna recommend for how we go about climate action planning or sustainability planning, kind of our next steps, are number one, completing that baseline inventory. And then once we hit that inventory, adopting a more specific target, so 50% reduction, or maybe we can hit 70% reduction, or like Krista views is our municipal operations will be 50% in 5 years, so like their fleet and their municipal buildings are gonna reduce more emissions, and then they have a community target. There's a lot of different targets that we can adopt. And then forecasting emissions, selecting our strategies, and then funding, implementation, monitoring, tracking progress. Tracking progress by doing more inventories. So in a little bit more detail, what that looks like is phase one, collecting greenhouse gas emissions inventory data. So we had actually started an inventory in 2019, and all the data there, which is the heavy lift. So that inventory we can use as our baseline. And then I would love to complete an updated inventory for 2022 or 23. If we wanted to do 23, we'd probably have to start a couple months into 2024 to give like GCA time to figure out all of their stuff on their end for 2023. So basically collecting the data is me reaching out to GCA, for example, and asking how many kilowatt hours of electricity did Mount Krista use in this year. And sometimes that takes a while, sometimes it's really fast. GCA is pretty quick with it usually. But that could take a couple months. And the reason that we want to do that is we want to figure out our largest sources of emission. And I also think it'll be really interesting to see compare 2019 to 2022. Emissions usually go right along with GDP. So if GDP is increasing, emissions are generally increasing. I think it'd be really interesting to see how the fluctuations have been since 2019 to now, because Mount TP has gone through some fluctuations. And then adopt a target, which should at least be 50% emission reductions by 2030. So about probably 15 times. And then forecasting our emissions is another part of data collection. And that's where we use online tools to do the math to figure out strategy A, strategy B, strategy C within buildings. One's gonna decrease our emissions by 10%, one's gonna decrease our emissions by 5%. Like we can do the math to figure out which is gonna have the most impact on emissions. And that lets us know like where do we have the most leverage? Where's the biggest bang for our buck? And then this is also when we want to start thinking about our other sustainability metrics, things that we're want to consider. So if that's water use, energy cost burden, percent of open space that's conserved, noxious weeds, anything like that, I want to start thinking about how we can measure those so that when we create a plan, we can check off every quarter or every year how we're doing on each of those metrics. That's phase one. That's mostly me doing some nitty-gritty data collection. And then stage 2 is going to be strategy development. So this is when I want us all together to define strategies. So climate action focused strategies that are really focusing on climate action, reducing our emissions, sustainability strategies that are focusing on other metrics, and then thinking about our co-benefits of economic sustainability, health and safety, improving environmental quality, promoting equity, building resilience. This is when we start to consider all of those other factors and weigh which solutions are gonna give us the most positive benefits. And at this point, I also would love to host a bunch of community involvement events, so it's not just us deciding what we think are the priority action items. But I would love to work with key stakeholders within the whole valley, so sustainability staff as well as HICA and the Upper Gunnison and anybody who could be RTA, like all these key stakeholders to try to refine their strategies. And then having community open houses and public comment periods.
Well, I was gonna mention, I think one of the larger players in the town. Would be Vail Associates, and they really need to be drawn into this discussion as well. Being the largest employer, one of the largest users of resources in the community, commercial. So that's a
Yeah,
key
so
stakeholder.
I think
needs to be
Vail should
involved.
be like step one, but.
And I agree with that 100%, and also, they may have some information that we can get to, I mean, it's hard to tell exactly what they're doing.
Have information, whether or not.
I'm trying to give it as many caveats as possible.
I think on this topic, they would share, because they've got a really strong program related to all this.
Yeah, so I linked a bunch of climate action plans at the end of this presentation and Vail's commitment to zeros in there. So community involvement, get a lot of community input on our priority items, what kind of strategies fit the best with our culture. And then after we've had community to define our strategies, then council and staff will come back and refine our strategy, draft an action plan. While we're not stopping all of our sustainability projects, we're doing them concurrently. Draft an action plan, implement, always implementing and always tracking progress. And most jurisdictions repeat their emissions inventory like every 3 years because it is kind of a pain to get all of the data, but this is a small jurisdiction, so we can do it more frequently than that. And then tracking those sustainability metrics that we define. So that's my recommended action plan to make our action plan. What other questions can I answer?
As we move forward, I hope we're mindful of certain things with thinking about construction costs. There's a perception of things keep getting added on top of one another. So as we have a new sort of, I don't want to say directive, but something that we're trying to implement, what can be removed from the existing requirements that become redundant or just too expensive on their own. It's already part of the process, but.
Well, I think that'll be part of the discussion once we bring the 21 codes before you this winter, as far as that cost trade off for, especially the energy conservation.
And things like, making progress pay its way. So if you want to have, this is just my thing, if you want to have a heated driveway, you might be able to have it, but the cost associated with being permitted to do that has such a large positive benefit on the other side, it outweighs the effect of that heated driveway.
Yeah, so there are also, I mean, there's a lot of things coming down from the state that are going to be requirements in the next 10 years, and right now they're incentive driven. So there's a lot of money out there for energy retrofits and EV charging and pretty much any e-bikes. Like there's a huge rebate coming down from the state right now for e-bike. So I think that one of the ways that we can kind of grapple with that increasing cost is trying to leverage as much money as we can from the state and from the IRA. IRA is like basically a climate action bill. There's a lot of money for projects. So trying to supplement those costs. So that it makes sense. Definition of sustainability, like it has to make economic sense. Else it's not. sustainable.
Downtown's 2030, in the last couple of weeks, there was a webinar on, electric bikes. I don't know if you got a chance to listen to it.
I did, yeah.
Okay, good, because I didn't get a chance to, and I was hoping somebody did, and it provided helpful information for what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, I can definitely dive into that at a different time, but one of the interesting things that they talked about was Park Cities. This is like getting really into the weeds. Park City has, they own, like the city owns a lot of their public lands, and so they have jurisdictional control over them, and they have very specific rules about e-bikes, like where they're allowed. In some places, they're not allowed, but you can have a placard if you're disabled or you're over 65, so you can ride your e-bike anywhere forever. So that was a lot that they talked about at that webinar. But, Mountain Town's a really cool resource. It's an amazing conference that I'm gonna go to in a month. And
The first one I did.
yeah, it's really, really interesting to see what is happening, how all these mountain communities with similar issues are kind of tackling this.
Okay, we're wrapping up. You guys have, you told you guys, I think Dwayne was next.
Oh, Dwayne.
Thank you for,
Yeah.
um, for your enthusiasm for the subject. One of the things that, you know, we picked up at the very beginning, you know, is the difference between a climate action plan and a sustainability plan, and I am absolutely on board for the sustainability plan. What I heard pretty much in your presentation, and yeah, what I heard in your presentation, pretty much all was aimed at the climate action plan.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't hear anything about the sustainability part of it, which is what, truth be told, I didn't expect anything different. What my concern is that in the process of looking at climate action, the cost burden and who is affected negatively most. You know, the 50% AMI guy, which is, you know, that I would just encourage you to keep that part of the equation more in focus, you know, or at least
Yeah.
in your considerations. Just saying.
Yeah.
Thanks.
absolutely.
As, I just want to tag to what Roman said, being mindful of cost, but also, I think we demonstrated it with the, Johnson Valley mitigation plan and the Mountain Town 2030 plans, just because everybody else is doing it. Doesn't mean that it's us, we don't have to dive in. I also suggest following the money because, you recall 2 or 3 years ago when Vail gave me the presentation about net zero, they talked about how would they get there, and then I asked the question, do you like to become 10% short? They said, well, we just write a check. And it makes it net zero.
Right.
And
We
to
can-
me, I'm always skeptical when you can write a check to get out of anything. And so follow the money, and let's, you know, just because everyone jumps in the pool doesn't mean that.
And to that end, and I know we're not there yet, but when the time comes, I just want to give you a little preview. Let's do the outreach part of it right away.
Yeah.
It occurs to me that, you know, we're talking about the Gunnison County plan, but with lots of things in our valley, we find that not all the municipalities are the same or on the same page. Many of them have different concerns. And so I think what the outreach piece will do for us is hear what our constituents say, not people down the hill, not people down valley, but what Mount Crested Butte residents think about this issue. Because I feel like that's kind of the part that's been missing. We get a lot of information from people. We all have opinions, but what we don't hear too much is like what our actual constituents think about this issue. And so that would be helpful for me to hear.
Yeah, I would love to have some open houses.
And then a detail, I just had this conversation like right before this meeting, but we have these questions about heated driveways and outside heated appliances, and Roman and I have had this exchange probably 5 different times where I talk about the snow blower that I run in my house, which is supposed to be a horribly polluting small engine. And how that compares to having Lacey Construction drive their front loader to clear my driveway, and then also how it compares if I had a heated driveway. And I have asked that question probably 10 times in different venues.
No.
And I've never got, okay, well, that's what I'm at,
I would love to, yeah,
please.
yeah.
You would love that map. He's been asking that a long time.
Well, cool, I'll be stuck to get that, because it's been stumping people for like 2 years now.
And could you, Christie, copy me?
So the
Alright.
short answer to that is it depends on where you're getting your electricity.
No, I know that's, but that would be easier for us because we know where we're getting ours.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Else that's like super nitty gritty, I would love to nerd out on new driveways, greenhouse gas emission inventories, at any time.
Cool.
So let me know.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So we've got just a few minutes. How about we take a 3 to 5 minute break?